I'm John Kolm. Tonight I get to interview a fellow Australian. Peter Ring is a decorated Air Force fighter pilot in the Australian Air Force, one of the few pilots to also teach at the Top Gun Academy of Fighter Tactics. Peter was decorated by his country and served in both peacetime and wartime, also with United States forces. As if that isn't enough, Peter is also the CEO of two very successful companies and has been an advisor at the very top levels in teamwork, leadership, team dynamics and organisational management to heads of state, heads of government and CEOs all over the world. Any list of the top 10 people in the field of teamwork and leadership would have to include Peter Ring. It is my great pleasure today to be able to speak to Peter and ask him some searching questions. Peter, thank you very much for being on Meet the Leaders. Well, Peter, you've often said that you prefer to wait till questions are asked and to meet the needs as they arise. So how long have you been meeting needs and doing this particular kind of work?
I kind of work about 30 years, and before that I guess the work I was doing was educating me for this kind of work.
So the question that most people would probably want to ask you is, what do people bring to you most often? What frustrations, what experiences do they have in the workplace? What issues, what challenges? What kind of things do they bring to you most often to get some advice about?
I think most people in teams, the big thing they bring is interpersonal relationship problems, which is affecting their job satisfaction and their productivity at work. So their frustration levels rise, they don't know how to deal with it, and they want advice. And I think that's pretty common for the 30 years I've been in this, doing this, but also for the previous, I hate to tell you this, but probably previous 25 years I was working in other jobs. So I think it's a lot to do with relationships and people feeling comfortable with other people.
What's the biggest frustration you see?
The biggest frustration in the workplace is not being listened to.
And what do you say to people who have that frustration, particularly when they've had it for years, when it seems to be just like background noise by now, when it's something that they accept and tend to think of as immovable?
Well, I think they have to just talk about how you take responsibility for being listened to. And a lot of the time you're not listened to because I don't think you're taking responsibility for what you've got to say. So I think how you say something and how much emphasis you put on it and how well thought out what you've got to say has a large effect on whether people want to listen. So I think they have to sit back, and everything in life in the long run you have to take responsibility for. That's a hard thing to say, particularly when you're dealing with maybe some people who are difficult, but in the long run that's what's got to happen.
Peter, one of the most interesting points you make, at least to my mind, is your notion of accepting responsibility. And by that you mean something very specific and very different from what most of us mean by accept responsibility. You've described it somewhat in Crocodile Charlie and the Holy Grail and elsewhere of course as well, but explain it to us. What do you mean by accepting responsibility?
Well, I think it's like being aware that 24 hours a day you're running your life, and if it's not running the way you want to, then you have to change something to try and make it run that way. So you have a helicopter accident, you're lying on the ground, you've just been flattened by a falling helicopter, you got the foot off your leg and you're feeling quite miserable, you've got abrasions and you've been knocked half unconscious and you feel like lying there and being a victim. So that's when you've got to stop taking responsibility. So somewhere you've got to muster the energy to say, I have to move, I have to get up, I have to take charge of the situation again and make sure I survive this. But that's what I mean by taking responsibility for what's happening to you in life.
So let's pursue that a little bit, because you actually did crash in a helicopter, right? The helicopter fell out of the sky.
It did.
What exactly happened? Why does a helicopter fall out of the sky?
Flying control rods broke, which means the rotor was no longer controllable, therefore it flapped in the breeze and the helicopter lost all lift and the only way is down. G-force is very, very evident at that stage.
All right, but then, after all, Peter, you're the pilot, and this was a mechanical failure, so this is a mechanic, this is a maintenance person. So in some ways, you're not responsible for maintaining the aircraft, you're the victim of somebody else's carelessness, or perhaps just of an accidental mechanical failure. But either way, most people would say, well, that's outside my control. I can't possibly take responsibility for that. So how can you sit there and say you have to take responsibility when something like that happens to you?
That's true. You can only take responsibility for the effects it's caused, not for the actual thing. So I think the effects it's causing you can take responsibility for, if possible. On the way down, there was no way in the world I felt like taking responsibility. I was quite terrified. But at some stage you regain your control to some degree, and enough of a degree, to finally say, hey, I better take charge here because it's my life and it's my future. And otherwise you can lie there and wait for ambulance, wait for rescuers,
Right.
wait to be picked up. But
Yeah.
even though you might be waiting for that, you still have to take charge of yourself mentally and take charge of your own morale and your own spirit.
Right.
And that's harder to say, harder to do, but if you have it firmly in your mind that you should take responsibility for your life, it's a lot easier to recover from any situation you're in. Whereas if you haven't made that decision, then it's much harder to actually achieve that.
So most of us in the workplace are information workers. That's not to disrespect those of us who fix drones for a living, and for that matter, I put myself through college driving a concrete mixer. But about 80% of us, our work is to do with a desk and probably a cubicle and a computer and managing information in some way. And quite frequently, people like yourself get trotted out, maybe not face to face, but in books and on TV, because you've done something extraordinary. You're a fighter pilot, you taught at the Top Gun school, you've been in wars, you've been decorated by your country, you've been a CEO of a very successful company, a couple of them in fact, and you've advised some very, very successful people, and some of those people are very, very well known. But I sometimes wonder, and nobody ever asks, how real is that experience to somebody who works in a cubicle? Why can't they say, well, you know, that's great if you leave that life of adventure, but that's very foreign to me, that's not very applicable to me, I don't see how any of your wisdom really translates to me in my everyday life, doing something a bit more ordinary. What do you say to those people who would just say there's not much, it may be interesting to listen to, but there's not really much connection for them?
Wow, you know how to ask the questions in that sense. That's a huge question, and I don't think there's any simple answer. I think it's a mental state to start with. And you can fly fighters, but if you don't have the mental state, you won't survive. And you can fly combat helicopters. If you don't have the mental state, you won't survive. And it's like anything. If you don't have the mental state, you won't survive. Now, how do you arrive at the mental state is to do with, is that a job you really want to do? Is that, or you're doing that because you need the income? If you're doing it because you need the income, then you need to keep doing it until you can achieve other plans, or to put other plans into place. But I think a lot of it is in a workplace. A lot of the satisfaction doesn't come from the actual task. It comes from the relationships. And I think if I were sitting in, which I have done, and sitting in that situation you spoke of, I'd be looking around me for relationships which buoy me up, give me a little bit of spirit and emotion and build my resolve. And I think that would translate itself into the task I'm doing. And I think too often we fail to realise other people are a source of energy for us and a source of inspiration. And subsequent to that, because we believe that and it starts to happen to us, we start to become a source of inspiration and energy to other people. So the whole thing becomes a multiplier, which is very effective. And that's what I've spent the last 30 years trying to build in people, is that sense of create relationships. It is the fuse to your whole relationship at work, your whole workplace environment. If you've got a strong relationship, you can endure the wars and the trials and the tribulations. If you've got weak relationships, the fuse blows and you're isolated. And that's a sad thing to be, but it happens too often in the workplace where people feel as though the fuse is blown and the relationships have gone down the drain. So often I think you need to work on the relationships.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute. When Hiro Toyota, with Toyota with a D, founded Toyota with a T just after World War II, he was just a guy working in his garage with no money, a small amount of borrowed money, and a couple of friends, and just about everybody who knew him thought he was crazy. Japan was in ruins, there was no industrial tradition there at all, he had this huge ambitious vision, And that, of course, is not what we think of when we think of Toyota today. And I happen, as you know, to know Toyota very well because they've been a client of ours for 20 years. But we think today of a giant company with manufacturing and systems and procedures and complicated processes and everything that involves. But I want to reflect for a minute on the enthusiasm and the excitement and the motivation that was there for Hiro Toyota and his crazy friends when they started this huge enterprise in 1946. How do you preserve that kind of creative craziness, that kind of enthusiasm and passion and excitement in a large organisation and prevent the mundane from just coming in from all sides and crushing you?
I think if you preserve almost your youth in your mind, youth are always optimistic and eager. And I think sometimes as we grow up, we become brainwashed by life and we tend to think we're getting old and we sink into ruts and into paradigms, and that, I think, flattens us. So somehow I think people like, or people who start organisations such as Toyota, not just himself who started in a shed with a sewing machine, an idea to produce sewing machines, but other people have sustained themselves through that innovation and that eagerness through their relationships. And I think you need to relate a lot to other people who have the same spirit, but then you need, for people who've actually achieved that spirit together, they need to spread it to other people who haven't quite found their way through to have that spirit. Right. So I think again, it comes back to the relationships and what's happening with that.
So I'd like to pursue that a little bit more. Let's think about two questions. The first is to do with perhaps an older person in the workplace, somebody my age, maybe a bit younger, maybe about 50. But they've been around for years. They're very used to the workplace and maybe even jaded, wouldn't be putting it too impolitely. And they're likely to have a very good counter-argument for anything you tell them about spirit, enthusiasm, and excitement and fun and joy in the workplace. And for them, in a lot of cases, in this hypothetical example, you look in their eyes and you can see the lights have gone out. It's become mundane for them. Life is a long grey tunnel. Work is a long grey tunnel. And they have a lot of life experience, so you can't just fill them full of sunshine and happiness with no reality. What do you say to somebody like that who says, look, I've been around, I know the score, don't blow sunshine up my you-know-what?
I think in the beginning, if you're not careful, that also spreads into your time off. So all of a sudden your whole life's like that if it's become that strong in the workplace. And I advise them to get out of a weekend and do something that excites them, do something new, do something that lifts their energy, do something that they just look forward to. Doesn't matter about the workplace for the week. What matters in the beginning is just getting out and raising your spirits, doing something that you want to do where you are the boss or you are in control of what you do, and get out and raise your spirits. I think also then when they go back to work, they need to locate some people in their workforce who have got, younger people even, who have got some energy and some spirit, and don't necessarily ask them about why they feel so happy in the workplace, but just have a cup of tea with them, sit down with them for lunch and discuss the football or discuss the movies or discuss anything that is of common interest. And all of a sudden, there's an old saying, if you lie down with dogs, you will get up with fleas. And I think you need to move away from what's causing you to be depressed. Despite the fact you can't move away from work, you can move into a new life of weekend, and you can start to sit with some people at lunchtime or morning tea or wherever it's possible who do have that sort of positiveness that you'd like to regain. And I think you'll find if you follow that, the other thing they say is fake it till you make it.
Yep.
And that's got a lot of truth.
Have faith and faith shall be rendered unto you.
True. And there's a lot of...
Act as if you have faith, pardon me. Yeah.
And there's a lot of research now, brain research, that shows that's true. You need to remap your neural pathways, which have become down the doom and gloom, to use your words, down the doom and gloom channels. You need to remap those neural pathways, and you can do that starting with the weekends and then moving slowly into the workplace. I think you'll find your life will change over time.
Yeah.
You also need, while you're doing that, to report to someone how successful you're being, because everybody likes to tell someone, I had a success. Saturday afternoon I got really fired up. And I think you need to have someone that you can relate that to who'll listen and go, wow, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you feel like you're still in a vacuum trying to battle against this huge seas and waves that are coming at you. And you need someone to say, keep going, that's great.
Yeah.
And listen to what successes you're having, as little as they might, as small as they might be.
And in fact, they do exactly the same thing in therapy groups. And even the people who are there and who need the therapy tend to think that it's corny and cheesy and very silly, and they make fun of it and they make jokes about it. But it works.
It works. And I think sometimes we should think it's corny and make fun of it, because that's fun in itself.
Yeah.
You know, in some of the facilitators that I was working with, not so much now, but a few years ago, we used to finish a team program or a training session, and we'd sit in the car on the way back to where our headquarters, our office, and we'd think of all the things that we had trouble dealing with in the program. We'd all have a whinge about it. If you know what a whinge is, a complaint, a session where we just unload what had made us unhappy. And the one who had the best unloading session, you know, they got a free ice cream. So, you know, then we'd laugh about it, and all of a sudden that negativity changed into positivity. So I think you need to be real about what you're experiencing and laugh at those bits that need to be laughed at.
That's funny, because in my experience, it's sometimes the things you say at work that can corrupt relationships and corrupt processes and corrupt affinity, but more often than not, it's the things you don't say.
Yes, yeah, dead right.
So think about that other person now, the other side of the equation, that young person. They haven't been in the workforce long, they're full of enthusiasm, they've got lots of young energy, they're very curious, they're probably fairly ambitious. They want to do well, and they want to have a life at work that's satisfying to them, whatever satisfying means. And they come to you because you're the elder statesman and they're hoping for some wise advice. So what would you say to them? And you've only got 2 minutes because you're in the elevator.
Well, I first of all want to make sure the goals that they have for themselves they're enthusiastic about, because it's damn hard to fight against something or work with something you're not enthusiastic about and maintain your spirit. So the thing is, are the goals you've got enthusiastic about? Do you have some personal goals? Do you have some way of measuring and acknowledging yourself when you achieve those goals? Do you have other people who are like-minded who you can talk to? Don't need to be from the same workplace. Anybody who's like-minded, can you get together and chat about your successes, your failures, your frustrations, your mysteries? And I think young people can use each other a lot to, even though they've got entirely different goals and different points that they want to achieve, they can chat to each other a lot to elevate each other's enthusiasm and satisfaction. I don't think we do that enough. We don't network enough with like-minded people. So
do you think that can, to some degree, inoculate younger people toward the beginning of their careers in the workplace when they meet that person, that inevitable person? I've certainly met one, more than one. I'm sure you have, and I think probably everyone watching has. Just after you've had the big pep talk from the organisation, vision, values, strategy, what a great place this is, how lucky you are to be here, everybody cares about you, and then that person, usually the older man, the older woman, they pull you aside and they say, listen, young'un, don't believe a word of what you just heard. You really got to watch your back around here. You've got to cover yourself, never tell the truth, never put your neck on the line. That's how it really is around here. Do you think that what you've been talking about can mitigate that in some way? And stop that culture of cynicism from spreading and bringing people down with it?
You can't, but I think that's what the small group, that if you form a group, 4 or 5, 6 people maybe, where you meet once a month for lunch or dinner, and I think if you relate what's happening to you at work, you know, everyone's got ideas on how you combat that. So rather than all the ideas coming from someone like myself, I like to put it back and say, go and consult those other friends you've got, the people that you trust and have fun with, and get their opinions, because they may be having the same difficulty at work to a less or larger degree, and you may come up with some really interesting ways to combat that message at work that says, sit still, shut up, do what you're told, and you'll keep employment. Well, you better start questioning whether that's the aim, to keep employment. But I tell you what, when I'm this age now and I look back, if I hadn't had a little bit of spirit, and being a little bit of an argumentative bugger, and being a little bit on the edge and taking the chance of getting sacked, I don't think I'd be happy with myself, because I would have said I just became a victim to all the people who told me what I should do and not what I wanted to do.
Now, Peter, you mentioned neural pathways a little while back, and I'd like to return to that for a moment, because not everybody might know what it's about, and some people might think that just sounds like a load of hippy-dippy, new age, touchy-feely nonsense, and other people might just not know what it is, and other people might be very, very interested, because there is in fact a tremendous amount of science and discovery going on in that world at the moment. And what's interesting, to me at least, is that yet pretty well almost all of the leadership and team related training that we get is in the intellect. There's nothing wrong with the intellect. We all have advanced degrees, but it's based on the intellect, it's based on books, it's based on theories, it's based on talking and reading and writing. My question to you is, so what? That's how I went through college. What's wrong with that? And what is all this neural pathway stuff anyway?
You know, put it simply, if you're sailing down the river or travelling down the river in a canoe on a nice bright sunny afternoon, and it's a Saturday, and you see a beautiful tree by the river, you'll establish neural pathways about what is good about the tree. You'll establish that it's a nice place, nice thing to paint, it's a nice thing to sit under, it's a good place to time a canoe up. When you see that tree again next time, rather than the brain re-deciding what it is, there's a pathway already been established about trees on riverbanks looking beautiful, and the pathway says that's good to paint. And the brain forgets to re-examine that it needs to take this situation afresh and make new decisions about it. So you've established a neural pathway. And I think that's the way we tend to do a lot of things in life. We forget to look. I've seen John Kolm before, and I know who he is, and I don't need to ever look again. Well, John's just bastard his backside for the last 6 months changing, and he's a lot different person, and I just keep recategorising because my neural pathways say John is John and he'll never change. And of course he will never change while I'm listening to my neural pathways and not taking a fresh look and saying, where's John now? Is it the same John I knew 6 months ago?
Yeah. The brain is really quite a remarkable machine. It works extremely well most of the time, but like all very complicated systems, it does have its limitations. And one of those comes from the tendency, the programming that we have that's physiological, to categorise everything we see, everything we experience, and everyone we see and experience. It's very, very important. It's the secret of the brain's efficiency. But if it's not done consciously and deliberately, it can turn into something very harmful. It can turn into categorising and classifying people on very superficial grounds and keeping them in that category forever, can't it?
You just got both effect in both directions, and I think that's a big factor in the workplace about how people treat each other. I met Mary 10 years ago and she's still the same. Yeah. And Mary isn't the same. Mary's changed a lot, and Mary feels as though everybody keeps categorising her the way she was maybe 10 years ago.
All right. Yeah.
So it's a very interesting topic in the workplace.
So let's suppose, just hypothetically, I'll play the part of an actor acting the part of someone who's actually a good leader. And in this hypothetical scenario, I am a good leader, I care about my people, I want them to do well, I want to do well, I want to have the things in the group that create excellence and create affinity and create happiness and success and productivity, all of that. But I'm a technical specialist in this scenario. I'm an engineer, and a very good engineer, which is how I got promoted. As well as that, I have some management skills, which is why I got put into a management role. But I am not a specialist in team and leadership dynamics any more than you could design a rocket propulsion system. So what's your advice to somebody like that character, an intelligent, educated person who's come to you as the expert? What should I do about my team? What kind of training should I do? Whom should I hire? What should I look out for? What do I do, Peter?
Do you know, I have to go right back to many, many years ago when I flew fighters and helicopters. And when I didn't know what to do, the first advice any instructor was give me, and this wasn't just technical, it was also to do with my fears and my self-constraints. And he said, the instructor said, go and get in the simulator, because you have to experience it in a non-dangerous environment, a non-critical environment. And after a while, I started to find the major changes that came into my life came from either it being in a crude simulator where you're interacting with the crew on a crude simulator and everyone was having fun and taking some things to the extreme because we're only in a simulator. And I think some of the biggest changes in my life came from that simulator environment. I believe that the only way you can do it is go and do something different with your team, but something that's real, and change the neural pathways to do with relationships, not to do with tasks.
Understood.
And that will create a whole collegiate team. Not that you remain collegiate all day, but there's always that spot when trouble hits and you're feeling a little bit down. That collegiate feeling in your team enables you to regain your strength again, to go back and do some individual endeavour again, or some endeavour in small groups. But I think that feeling I'm home, and therefore whatever trouble I get into, we can handle this at home, which, home being the workplace that you're in, because of that group spirit and the group togetherness.
Well, that's the perfect piece of advice to end on. Peter Ring, thank you very much for being on Meet the Leaders.